Order in the meeting of the Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee for January 9th, 2023. Our first order of business this evening is approval of the agenda. You will see that I'm missing a couple of my partners up here, General Manager Quaster and Director Carlson over at the Capitol right now for the Senate hearing. And so I propose moving the director reports to the end of the meeting. And if there's no objection with that, I'd take a motion to approve the agenda.
Make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Great. Moved by Councilmember Sterner. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we're on to approval of the meeting minutes from the December 12th, 2022 Transportation Committee. If there are no changes or additions, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Fredson. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Pacheco. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And the motion carries. As we said, we're moving reports to the end, and there are no items on consent. So our first order of business tonight is business item 2023-12, which is review of the Metropolitan Airports Commission 2023 through 2029 Capital Improvement Program. We have Cole Hiniker.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Cole Hiniker, Multimodal Planning Manager in MTS. I'm presenting an item for you today, our annual review of the Metropolitan Airports Commission CIP. So there is a business item in front of you. Just wanted to give you a little background. We do this every year. Met Council staff is charged in state statute with reviewing MAC CIP for consistency with the region's long-term comp plan or long-term system plan for aviation. We also look at a couple things. If there's any projects that are considered regionally significant, we actually have to approve them. We don't have any this year, so you're off the hook on that front. But there have been some recently in the past, an extension of an airport at a reliever airport. We're actually expecting one of those next year as well. But we only take on the next year's list of projects. So for 2023, MAC CIP does not have any projects that require our approval. So what you're actually just acting on is that you agree with staff's assessment of the CIP and that you agree that we assessed it to be adequate for public comment and public responsiveness in MAC's process, and that it's consistent with the 2040 aviation system plan. So as I said, we did review it. We found a lot of projects that met a certain dollar threshold, which is $5 million at MSP and $2 million at the reliever airports. They did not meet any of the significant effects criteria. Those are all actually listed. I think they're listed in your business item. But if not, they're generally things like expanding airport runways, expanding capacity of passenger movements, anything that takes additional right-of-way. So none of the projects this year met that criteria, even though there are some pretty substantial projects at MSP this year. The only other thing is that we do look at the environmental assessment of airports that MAC does annually as part of their CIP to make sure there's no issues. And any project that has a separate environmental assessment, the council always is considered a partner that reviews and comments on those. We did get one this year for a project that's ongoing in Concourse G. And so the council staff actively do review projects for consistency on a project-by-project basis, even if they don't meet those thresholds. So with that, and we do have MAC staff here if you have any specific questions about the CIP. I'm by no means an expert on the details of their CIP, though I did read the whole thing, believe it or not. I would just entertain any questions, but otherwise ask you to take action on the proposed action that the Met Council find that MAC had an adequate public process for the development of their 2023 to 2029 CIP, and that they find that the CIP projects this year are consistent and in conformance with the Regional Aviation System Plan. I did want to note, I should have said this in the action, TAAC normally acts on this ahead of your action at the Transportation Committee, but they were canceled in December because of inclement weather. So TAAC will actually be acting in, let's see, 2 weeks, and your action will be contingent on their action. So we do look for TAAC to act first. They'll be acting ahead of the council meeting, but you're acting today contingent on TAAC concurring with this action. And just one other note is that we're actually going to have Brian Ricks, the CEO of MAC, come to the full council meeting on the 25th and just kind of give an overall update of what MAC's been up to and what the airports are experiencing, just as an information item. So you'll see that at the full council meeting.
Thank you, Cole. Any questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Sterner.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a point of information, but who oversees the Rochester Airport?
I believe it's Olmsted County. Do you know, Bridget? The city of Rochester and
City of
Olmsted
Rochester
County.
has their own airport. Okay, very good. Thank you.
All right. Additional questions or comments? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2023-12.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilmember Zarin, second by Councilmember Gonzalez. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. And we look forward to hearing more at the council meeting. Next, we're on to business item 2023-6. The next three, we have Mr. Alexander here to present because they're all for Green Line extension. I do want to note just in the agenda that there are placeholders for presentation and additional materials. For these next three items, there is no presentation or additional materials, just the business item. And I'll turn it over to you, Jim.
All right, Madam Chair, thank you. Jim Alexander, Project Director for the Green Line Extension. Council members, I have this afternoon, this first item, 2023-06, relates to an amendment to the contract we have with AECOM for Advanced Design Consultant Services. AECOM has been on board actually since the really start of engineering on the project. They were preliminary engineering on the west part of the project, and then we went for a new procurement for the full engineering of the project, and that started in 2014, and so they've been with us since that time, and we need to continue their efforts as engineer of record. It's important they have a seat at the table as we're completing the construction. And so this afternoon, I have a proposed amendment, number 14, to add $9.8 million to the contract, which would bring the total to $160.6 million. And to kind of give you an idea, is the burn rate has been running about $1 million per month. And so we have a lot of folks behind this. There's a number of sub-consultants part of this effort. It's they're housed in our project office. They're also in satellite offices. And so we have quite a few folks to keep our questions answered and change orders addressed as we move through construction. So with that, and I would also add, maybe before I conclude, is the DBE portion. AECOM's been doing a good job on this. They're currently at 20%, matching up to a goal of 19% was set by OEO back when the contract started. So with Madam Chair, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just think it's important to note that I think this additional funding that the Met Council put in and that our other partner from Hennepin County has put in allows us to renew these contracts. I know you're going to speak to another one, but it's really important that this project continue to move forward. Time is money, and we need to get this project up and going as soon as we can. And so I think that the partnership, it hasn't always been easy to figure out how we're going to do this, but we did figure out how we're going to get through the upcoming year and into 2024. And I again would thank our partners for that, and certainly thank the project office for everything that you did on behalf of the project, because this is really important. And I think continuing to move this forward by these contract extensions is really important. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you, Councilmember. Additional questions or comments?
Madam Chair, if I could add just for context, we're carrying this amendment through year of 2023. We will have to revisit this as we proceed in the out years beyond that. So just wanted to make sure everybody's aware of that.
Okay, thank you. Additional questions, comments? All right, just to reiterate, the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute amendment number 14 to contract 14P125 with AECOM for advanced design consultant services to add $9.8 million for a total contract amount not to exceed $160.6 million. With that, I would entertain a motion to approve business item number 2023-6.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Cummings, seconded by Councilmember Fredson. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay, and the motion carries. Back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this next item is 2023-07. It relates to an amendment to the contract we have with Kimley-Horn. This be amendment number 4. Kimley-Horn is responsible for the construction management services supporting us anyway. We have construction staff that are Met Council, Met Transit people. We also have MnDOT folks on that staff, but we need support from the consultant as well as we proceed with the construction on this project. And so this amendment number 4 seeks to add $3.87 million to the contract for a total of $17.87 million. And similar to the AECOM, the ADC contract amendment, this would carry us through 2023. We would be revisiting this toward the end of the year to see where we need to be for the out years. Now, this is just for civil construction, so we anticipate that this won't take us full all the way to the end of the construction at this juncture, but just through the civil construction. And I would note that when this contract was set back in 2017, OEO did not define a goal for this, but working with the OEO folks and the contractor and the consultant, they have found a way to get some DBE participation. We're currently running 14%, and they'll continue to be a focus on this contract, even though it's not an actual goal set in the contract. So with that, Madam Chair, I propose this amendment, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments from council members? All right, just to read the proposed actions that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute Amendment 4 to Contract 17P060 with Kimley-Horn and Associates for construction management support services to add $3.87 million for a total contract amount not to exceed $17.87 million. With that, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2023-7.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Chambliss, second by Councilmember Zarin. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay, and the motion carries. One more, back to you. And we have Julie Brenny, sorry. For business item 2023-8, master contracts for material testing and testing inspection services. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Julie Brenny from Engineering and Facilities. Madam Chair and committee members, I'm presenting business item 2023-8. Metro Transit has used master contracts for 20-plus years as part of our engineering services. This procurement actually replaces previous contracts that have expired, and the contracts will be used by staff for a wide range of capital and operating projects, and the related costs will be built into those projects. So it's by a project basis. Work completed within this scope includes items such as infield concrete strength testing, slump air content tests, infield asphalt tests, composition tests, infield soil density and moisture and compaction tests, and weld and other structural connection inspections. And then there could be other items that come up dependent on a project. The procurement was a Brooks Act procurement, which is a two-step process. So we received proposals, an evaluation panel was selected, they reviewed the proposals and selected those that were the most responsible and could reach consensus on those proposals. Once that is done, we then receive the cost proposals, and those are evaluated by OEO, and then the panel reviews the proposals to determine that they're cost-effective and within our independent cost estimate. The Office of Equal Opportunity assigned a 10% goal to this group of contracts. The previous contracts did not have a goal, so this is a new goal on contracts. And both firms that were selected are using the same DBE, and it appears they're the only DBE in the market because all proposers that submitted a proposal, there were 4, used the same DBE. So it'll be a new working relationship for us and this vendor. I don't believe we've worked with them in the past. We are requesting authorization to award 2 contracts at $750,000 each for a total of $1.5 million over 5 years. And with that, I can answer any questions.
All right, questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Sterner.
Right, thank you, Chair. I just was wondering in the past, like how much money is carried over from one year to the next? You know, it's not to exceed 750,000 in this case. How much do we expect it to be available next year, or is it usually always maxed out?
Council members and Chair, we would anticipate that this would take us through the 5 years. And not necessarily an equal amount each year, but we've analyzed our CIP and what we anticipate we will need over the course of those 5 years. And we do allow for use of these contracts by other departments. So the BRT office may utilize them. The project offices have utilized some of our contracts in the past. So we do allow for that. Historically, we do use the majority of the value of the contracts.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions or comments? All right, then I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2023-8.
I'd make a motion to approve the item.
Moved by Councilmember Sterner. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Gonzalez. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay, and the motion carries. Thank you,
Thank you.
Julie. We're on to our final business item for the night, which is business 2023-13, which is an amendment to the Snelling Net Ground Lease. And we have Michael Krantz and Greg Ewig here. Welcome. And we do have a presentation on this.
Madam Chair, committee members, I'm Michael Krantz, Acting Program Manager of the TOD Office for Metro Transit.
And Chair and committee members, I'm Greg Ewig, the Director of Real Estate.
So we're presenting business item 2023-13, which proposes amending an existing ground lease with the City of St. Paul to create 2 new ground leases. The intent of this amendment is really to support transit-oriented development that advances the broader vision for redevelopment of this super block. So you may be familiar with this site. On the left is actually an image of the site as it existed in the early 1950s when it was still a streetcar and bus operation and maintenance facility for Twin Cities lines. On the right's an image of that site as roughly as it exists today, looking from the opposite direction. The stadium here was the first phase of what was envisioned to be a much broader redevelopment of this area. So this is a photograph of the stadium looking southeast. In the foreground are 2 temporary surface parking lots that were designed and constructed to temporarily serve operational needs for the stadium until redevelopment occurred on this site. And again, the intent of this business item is to support redevelopment that advances the TOD goals on these parking lots. So this does trigger the TOD policy. The TOD policy establishes 4 goals for these projects, which are to maximize the development impact of transit investment, support regional economic competitiveness, advance equity, and support a 21st century transportation system. And ultimately, this business item advances those goals by supporting the private development of jobs, housing, and retail next to the A line and the green line transit ways which serve this area. Ultimately, development here is going to further integrate transportation, jobs, and housing. It's going to leverage additional private investment, increase access to opportunity along both of these corridors and other transit that serves the area, but also to increase transit ridership from that development. So the vision for redevelopment of this area is guided by the Snelling Midway Master Plan, which was adopted by the City of St. Paul back in 2016 after an extensive community engagement process. And that master plan envisions an urban village here with a mixture of jobs, housing, hotel space, and community retail. And in short, a vision that significantly advances the goals that were outlined in the TOD policy. I'm now going to hand it over to Greg to provide a little bit of background on the existing ground lease and also the proposed terms.
Thanks, Michael. Chair, committee members, I'll talk through the details of the deal in a moment, but first I'm going to take a little detour into the original acquisition of the site, which is worth noting and plays a role in our next steps. The original parcel was acquired using federal funds back in the 70s, and the site was used for bus dispatch, storage, and operational maintenance until the early 2000s. The council demolished the bus barn in 2001, and it remained undeveloped until the location generated interest as a site for the new Major League Soccer stadium. As part of those conversations, the council did consult with the FTA, which confirmed a federal interest in the land, partly driving the original deal structure, and we'll talk briefly about the FTA later on in the presentation. Now, a few background points about the lease to set the stage. The original net ground lease was signed by the parties in 2016 and took into account the construction. The first game was played at the new Allianz Field on April 13th, 2019. And later that same year, in response to requests from the team in the city to restructure the lease, the council approved business item 2019-312, which authorized the regional administrator to amend the net ground lease with the city. When COVID occurred and civil unrest broke out in 2020, the parties paused negotiations. Negotiations resumed later in 2020, resulting in the proposed split of the property into 3 separate net ground lease parcels that we have before you today. The intent of the split really is to build more flexibility and financial appeal with the standalone net ground leases. So just to orient everybody, the picture on the left is a sort of a historic snapshot of the Midway Superblock and the original council property after demolition of the bus barn. You can still see the council used the site to store buses. There's a big row of the buses on the far right hand of the Met Council site. The right-hand picture shows the final site plan and an approximate depiction of where the stadium sits in relation to the council parcel. You'll note that the west and left side of the stadium site contains surface parking and are the areas subject to the new net ground leases, which I'll talk about in a second. As a reminder, the eastbound Green Line station is on the north side of this block, and the A line runs along Snelling Avenue on the westerly side, so really well positioned for transit. So a little highlight here, basically the dark bordered rectangle in the lower left hand of that sketch is the extent of the council land. The right, or the red colorations in the left part of that, that rectangle are the areas that we're talking about today. There's 2 parcels that would be set up as separate leases. One would be the what is designated as parcel 7A on the top and parcel 7F on the bottom. And they are actually bisected by Central Avenue, which is kind of the dividing, if you see between the 2. And the remainder of the rectangle there will just be the part of the amended original net ground lease. One last thing I almost forgot was that there are air rights over that Central Avenue portion of the site adjacent to Snelling Avenue. So here's a quick rundown of what stays the same and what changes from the current situation here. The terms that stay the same are the total rent. The rent amount really sums up the same as what we're currently receiving for rent. The tenant remains the same, which is the city of St. Paul. The total lease footprint stays the same. And then the initial expiration date for all these 3 will remain the same. The leases themselves, obviously, the 2 new net ground leases will have different start dates. And then most of the major terms will remain consistent from the original deal that we had worked out, such as design and construction supporting transit-oriented development requirements. The key changes that are involved here is an option to extend the development parcel term. That has a couple of triggers on it, including there has to be development occurring within 15 years or that option goes away. And there's also going to be a rent reset option for that subsequent option term. And the other change here is the council's environmental liability is limited for these 2 development parcels. So there will be any additional costs that would have to be incurred for remediation as a result of developing those portions will be borne by the city and the subtenant. So with that, I will turn the presentation back to Michael.
Thank you. So as Greg mentioned, this site was acquired in part with FTA funds, which means there's a federal interest in the property. It also means that the existing lease and any future leases are subject to the FTA's joint development guidance for this site. The original ground lease that was executed here was actually one of the very first joint development projects under that guidance that was approved in the country. And the FTA still advertises this project as kind of a model joint development as a national model for that. So that guidance establishes 4 criteria for joint development projects. The first is that, and these criteria actually align closely with the TOD goals. The first criterion is that a project create an economic benefit, and that's accomplished by facilitating private development on these surface parking lots. The second criterion is that it enhance public transportation, and that's really accomplished by supporting additional transit ridership from this future development and also creating a direct connection with transit here. The third criterion is that any development generate a fair share of revenue for the council and Metro Transit. That's accomplished through the existing rent payments that the council receives, which will remain consistent with the original ground lease over the initial term. And as Greg mentioned, that rent would be reset if an extension option is exercised so that it reflects future market conditions. And the final criterion is that a project needs to pay a fair share of costs. And that really only applies to conditions where there's some sort of shared facility, which doesn't apply in this case. An additional requirement in the joint development guidance is that we need to show how we're maintaining continuing control for transit purposes. That's accomplished through provisions in the ground lease that allow the council to provide design review and approval for all structures and alterations, but also to review any changes of use or changes to subleases on the site. Importantly, that review is limited to make sure that those changes don't have a negative impact on TOD goals or that they aren't negatively impacting transit safety and operational needs at this location. So next steps include authorization of this item by the council. Once this item has been authorized, staff can submit an amended joint development application to the FTA with the updated lease terms. Once we have received concurrence from the FTA, the regional administrator in the city can sign an updated lease and the easement documents for this site. And with that, we would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Fredson.
Thank you, Chair. I would just comment that, there's obviously a really great vision for this block. The United building, this field at this intersection was huge. I actually moved to St. Paul in 1996, and so remember the old bus barn and just a dramatically different landscape right now. And there's development directly across Snelling from both of these lots and lots of development just generally in the area. It was brought up that you have the green line, but you also, and A line, but you also have the B line just blocks away too. So I know some neighbors in the area are frustrated with folks parking, on their streets. And so just believe that this kind of development and obviously the continued investment in transit in the neighborhood just will end up with more transit usership. So the city is strongly supportive, as it was said, so is the team. And I think it's important that the council is supportive too.
Thank you for your comments. Additional questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and you may not know this, and it's just a question of curiosity. Do you have any idea, a breakdown of how many people use transit when they come to the game versus autos? Private transportation?
Madam Chair, committee member, I actually don't have those numbers on hand, but that is something that we track for all of our stadiums, and we could pull that together and share that information with you.
Just a question of curiosity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, additional questions or comments? Councilmember Gonzalez.
Just quickly, this federal interest in the property, is that presents any type of barriers for development or more steps that any potential developer needs to go through, realistically speaking, or is not really a burden on them?
Madam Chair and committee members, so the requirements are what we outlined here, and ultimately, the FTA is very supportive of seeing development next to these transit investments. So they've established some very clear criteria that they want to see for this development, but ultimately, the vision that's outlined for this area is very supportive of the vision that the FTA has established for joint development as well. There are some requirements of, as we mentioned, for continuing control that are included in that ground lease, but there aren't any additional requirements that apply beyond the provisions that are already included in the ground lease.
So realistically, it's not an added burden to any potential development, those?
Not significantly, not from what we've seen, yeah.
Thank you, that's what I meant, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, last call, questions, comments? All right, the proposed action tonight is that the Metropolitan Council authorizes the regional administrator to negotiate and execute amendments to the existing net ground lease for 400 Snelling Avenue North and existing easements, and to negotiate and execute 2 newly created net ground leases with the City of St. Paul from a portion of the original net ground lease along Snelling Avenue as depicted in Attachment A. With that, I would entertain a motion to approve business item 2023-13.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Fretzen. Is there a second?
Good.
Second by Councilmember Sterner. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. So that concludes our business for the evening. If there are no objections, I would propose that the first 3 items move non-consent to the full council and the final 2 items go consents. All right? Okay. All right, now we are on to our information items, and we have just one tonight. It's the Urban Freight Distribution Study, and Steve Elmer is here to present. And then we'll do-
Thank you,
Welcome.
Madam Chair and council members. I'm Steve Elmer. I'm here to brief you on the Urban Freight Distribution Study, which will be focusing specifically on e-commerce trends, issues, and opportunities for regional and urban planning. And just to start with a little bit of background here, why do we want to do the study now? So the needs for the study are driven by 3 factors. Really, the steady growth trend in e-commerce that goes back to the early 2000s and up and before COVID, and then accelerated somewhat during the COVID era here, is changing how we shop and where we shop for goods, and how those parcels are delivered. Secondly, based on some concerns we've heard in the past from local agencies on livability and sustainability issues, specifically about local impacts of urban deliveries. And lastly, this study will advance our existing transportation policy plan, policies, goals, and objectives through informing our ongoing development of the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan. To tie this to existing regional policies, the study's recommendations and conclusions will support our stated objectives within our existing TPP under the goal Healthy and Equitable Communities. Objective A, to reduce transportation-related vehicle emissions and specifically carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. And under competitive economy, to support the region's economic competitiveness through the efficient movement of freight. These are the key, most directly related policies. There are probably other multiple policies that would be secondary to that are also supported. In the land use realm, specific to our existing Thrive 2040 policies under orderly and efficient land use, this study will support the policy to align land use development patterns and infrastructure to make the best use of public and private investment. And under building in resilience, the policy to promote sensitive land use and development patterns to achieve Minnesota's adopted greenhouse gas emissions goals at the regional scale, as well as to develop local resiliency to the impacts of climate change. The purpose, we have multiple purposes doing this study. First, we want to analyze specific e-commerce trends, or specifically online consumer purchases trends at the national level as well as our Twin Cities region. We want to estimate the relative impact of our e-commerce parcel distribution, specifically last mile deliveries, which is the trip between the distribution center and the consumer. The effect on our region's vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, and the associated greenhouse gas emissions. To develop some guidance for cities that are engaged in curbside management through regional policy, as well as to identify potential land use strategies to increase efficiency and reduce regional VMT. So the scope, I'm not going to go through each task specifically, but we'll highlight some key research questions in the next series of slides. But we're dividing the work up into 3 key elements. Part 1 will be the focus on e-commerce trends and sustainability impacts, and that will be the most quantitative portion of the study, specifically getting at calculations through some very complicated analyses to get to VMT impacts. Part 2 is the land use element, if you will, focusing in on very specific trends in siting of warehouse and distribution centers, commonly known now as fulfillment centers, and their implications for transportation and land use planning. And then lastly, part 3 is to take a look at curbside management best practices and the applications of new technologies for those last mile deliveries. So key research questions under part 1, e-commerce trends. We want to learn what has been the trend in our e-commerce sales before COVID, and what can we assume for short and long-term conditions in this pandemic era. And then the very detailed question and analysis of determining to what degree does increasing e-commerce activity and its related changes in personal shopping behaviors increase or decrease VMT and the associated GHGs. Under part 2, each of these questions relates to our potential for minimizing overall VMT and maximizing delivery system efficiency. What are the recent trends in e-commerce fulfillment center development and logistics management? Secondly, what are various regional scale, land use, or other strategies for siting major freight distribution centers that could minimize VMT and associated GHGs? And what are some practical and sustainable strategies for locating parcel freight microhubs? And freight microhubs are places where people go to pick up their packages, so like the FedEx store, the UPS store, or Amazon lockers at Whole Foods or Cub Food stores, that kind of thing. And lastly, what are the advantages and disadvantages of siting fulfillment centers and freight microhubs in our dense urban centers versus our less dense suburban and ex-urban communities? In part 3, curbside management, best practices and new technologies. What are some best practices for managing curb space for urban deliveries? There'll be some research done looking at other MPOs as well as large cities in the US and Canada specifically. Secondly, what new or emerging technologies would hold the most promise for reducing VMT and overall emissions of greenhouse gases. And then specifically, at least at a minimum, we want to look at the potential benefits of and opportunities for promoting these emerging technologies for the last mile parcel deliveries. So we want to specifically look at air-based drones, land-based drones or robotics, cargo e-bikes, and automated driverless vehicles. And there may be some other emerging technologies we don't know about that this would delve into as well. And lastly, to what extent do these benefits of these technologies vary in our urban centers versus our suburban or ex-urban communities? So that should give you a sense of what this study entails and what it kinds of analyses that will go into that. Overall, we will have a e-commerce study, technical advisory committee set up to review our draft work and advise us through the process. This will be comprised of private sector, freight industry representatives, starting with our Minnesota Freight Advisory Committee members. We'll also include public agency planners, staff from Met Council and MnDOT, but also metro counties that have an existing tie to, as a host to an e-commerce facility, or they may have plans for future development in that area, as well as some selected area cities, also with ties to e-commerce. And then lastly, just to show the overall study timeline, we hope to get this project underway next month and have a kickoff meeting of our e-commerce technical advisory committee in March. And then we want to focus in specifically on those areas that will inform our policy development. First, the curbside management last mile technologies piece for the 2050 TPP to be delivered in May. And then the land use related policy recommendations for the 2050 regional development guide in June. And then we'll likely have a draft report completed by mid to late summer with the overall study completed in October. So that concludes my remarks. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Steve. Questions? Councilmember Pacheco, then Francis.
Just curious that, do you consider DoorDash and the delivery from restaurants and the like, it clearly expanding e-commerce? Are you looking at their impact?
Madam Chair and Councilmember, so we're not specifically going to look at that. I think we, specifically DoorDash, but there's a potential optional task in there to look at grocery deliveries overall. From our larger grocery chain facilities. So this is very specific look at parcel deliveries from the major carriers.
All right, Councilmember Fredson.
Thank you, Chair. Have you identified the cities and the counties yet? Like, were they, I guess my question is, have we asked them to participate? Are we seeking, giving folks the opportunity to apply? How does the selection work?
Madam Chair, Councilmember, no, we have not selected those yet, and we'll probably be consulting with the consultant team initially, and we have had some past freight studies where the counties were involved. Potentially all the counties could be involved. But that's a little bit undetermined at this point.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes. Do you know how much the study is estimated to cost?
I'm sorry, I
Do you know
didn't
how much
get,
the study is estimated to cost?
the cost overall is 200, not to exceed budget of 200,000.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering, so I sit on the 494 Corridor Commission, and I'm wondering how this kind of a study integrates into the work that the Corridor Commission is doing as well. It seems like there's some overlap there, and the information that you're coming up with would also be value to them.
Madam Chair, so was that the I-94 Corridor Commission? What, I'm sorry?
494 Corridor.
494? Yeah, there could be some relationship to that. The one thing, it's not a typical transportation traffic impact analysis, so we won't be doing traffic modeling and that kind of thing. Be much more higher level conceptual than that. So I'm not sure. There could be members of that coalition, of that corridor commission that might want to be involved on our committee.
Can I comment?
Go ahead.
It just seems that many of the issues that we're discussing also are issues related to very close to the study that you're proposing to do. So I would think that information sharing could be of great value to the commission. I know it's at a different level, but these
Sure.
questions are also very much in the realm of what the Corridor Commission is discussing.
Yes, Madam Chair, council member, I'm certainly willing to offer presentations to them as needed, and if there's interest on that group
Thank you.
specifically to be on our committee, we certainly be welcome to that.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that particular comment, it's probably a good idea because one type of freight you may not be considering as much as the movement of medical devices, which actually go through 494 to get through the airport because they actually leave through the airport versus some of the couriers. So that would be probably a good area to check on. Was it Councilmember Sterner?
Thank you, Chair. Just had a look on their part 3 of the curbside technology, and it may not be considered new, but I think it would be appropriate on the list there. But I was down at a conference in Miami, and they were using electric vehicles that are made locally for doing micro transportation of people, but they were large enough to do cargo transportation and that, and being electric, it could definitely be total green and reduce the carbon footprint, but it might be a way to get the bigger density like a cargo e-bike, for example, but still work in our local transportation of goods.
Yep. I would agree with that.
All right, additional questions, comments? All right, I have a couple questions. So the first question I had, when we did the truck corridor study, one of the things that we found out when we were doing that is we had to account for owner-operators and some of those things, and that really changed some of the numbers. We have a gig economy right now where a lot of those last-mile deliveries are done by people in their own cars. And so, especially when we're doing like the part 1, where you're looking at the trends and sustainability impacts and looking at VMT and things like that, how are you gonna factor that into this study?
Madam Chair, thank you for your question. To be determined, I guess. I think high-level calculations and assumptions would be derived from existing studies, knowledge base, but they won't be collecting like firsthand data or anything for that purpose specifically.
Okay, and then the second question I have is looking at your technical advisory committee. Reaching out to the counties with ties to e-commerce facilities is great, but there's a lot of e-commerce facilities here. It seems like it might make a good idea to reach out to some of the businesses, especially when you're looking at the trends going forward, because they're more likely, they're doing the same planning. And so it would be good to know what they're thinking of doing proactively. I think that would be a helpful piece to add to this.
Yes. Madam Chair, thanks. Part of the study will be to interview logistics managers, warehouse suppliers, and that kind of thing too, but we could also incorporate them into the advisory committee as well. So we're certainly open to any suggestions you might have or others. But yeah, we'll be doing that in the next month.
Okay. Additional questions, comments, council members? All right. Thank you. And now we have our honored guest back, so we're going to turn to reports. So, Director Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, council members. Apologies for the late arrival as we were covering the Senate Transportation Committee meeting. Hopefully not too much of a theme this spring, as the their regular meeting dates are Monday and Wednesday at 3 p.m. So pretty rough conflict in terms of when we have business before that committee and then subsequent business with the council. But also a good reminder of why we have these meetings here in St. Paul during the duration of sessions. So along those lines, welcome back to St. Paul for Transportation Committee. A couple quick updates. Some of our planning staff is actually out in Washington, D.C., attending the 102nd meeting of the Transportation Research Board this week. Their annual meeting is this week. TRB covers all modes of transportation, so there are thousands of transportation professionals from government, industry, and academia convening in D.C. The theme of the conference this year is rejuvenation out of disruption. So some folks out there, other folks joining virtually. So one of the pieces of rejuvenation is new formats and a new hybrid format that folks even here are able to participate in, as there's lectern presentations, workshops, and poster sessions. So we'll be excited to share some of the things we learn as they return. And then on the operations side, of course, need to address the challenging winter conditions we were faced with late last week, or in the middle of last week, particularly on Metro Mobility. Challenging conditions across the board, but a lot of dedication, teamwork, and perseverance. So a normal Metro Mobility weekday passenger load these days would be around 7,000 or 8,000. We provided between 4,000 and 5,000 each of the days last week at an on-time performance, in really, really historic snowfall conditions, between 75% and 80% on Tuesday and 85% to 90% on Wednesday. So a lot of work and dedication, and of course we ask in these kinds of events for our customers that they consider canceling if a trip is not essential. Because it frees up that capacity for required travel. And our customers helped us greatly with thousands of trip cancellations or reschedules, which allowed us to provide, that critical service to folks who needed it. So made possible through a big team effort, added drivers, of course, for the extra board, but also additional staffing in field supervision, dispatch, managers on site, phone support, and of course maintenance out in the field, helping to free stuck buses of minor and major extents across the region. So we made through it and are continuing to face, as all of us are in our travels, difficult travel conditions yet this week, but continue to make progress and improvement. With that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions, comments from council members? Armin, up to General Manager Koister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. I want to appropriately start my update by also recognizing the tremendous work of Metro Transit staff. I don't believe we've met since both the chilling weather with the blizzard and then the snowfall. So as I mentioned in an email to staff today, the term that comes to mind, it's been relentless in the start of the 2022-2023 winter. And it's just remarkable work that people do. And it impacts so many of our staff, and almost it's across the board effort. It's our bus operators, of course, for our train operators. It's the people who work on the tracks. We had a lot of problems with tracks during the cold weather with respect to switches not working and so forth, and we had all these events occurring with the Vikings games and so forth, and everybody's out there working in this weather on cold steel, as you can imagine, and I'm expressing appreciation from a warm house, so that's not lost on me at all. And it affects communications, affects Transit Control Center. It just goes across the board. I wish people could see the effort that takes place to keep services on the street during these weather events. It's just remarkable. And people are up to the task. They know it's part of their job, and they're there for our customers. So really, really do appreciate we appreciate it. We're going to try to find a way to recognize employees more formally. It's kind of hard to do because everybody's involved in this. But this is one start of recognizing them. And I also want to mention that Metro Transit even helped assist the airport by moving customers from a plane that slid off the runway. We sent a bus out to help move customers from the plane to the terminal. Also want to provide an update on the operator hiring. We have not had any events since I've last reported on this, so I won't go into great detail, but just mention that we are now finally seeing hiring that is giving us headway on the number of operators that we have over attrition. We have about 30 people actively in training. We have a number of more in the queue. As I've mentioned in past meetings, the hiring process of going out to the public for train operators brought in 63 applications. We are going to have enough interest to fill the 7 vacancies I believe we currently have, and then we may have to turn some back away because we have some funding restrictions on the light rail, but we have more discussions to have around that. We'll need more time to determine whether these early signs will continue, but we're hopeful. In February, we have a hiring event. We're planning for a Drive the Bus hiring event that will be held February 4th at the North Loop Garage. So we're inviting people to come and drive a bus. So if those of you who had that experience at the bus rodeo, I'm looking at Molly and others, it's quite a fun experience to operate a bus if you haven't operated a bus, and we're hoping that this attracts and spawns the interest of a lot of people who might want to become bus operators. Also wanted to mention the Central Station homicides and the public safety efforts around that. I think those homicides occurred perhaps the evening of the last time this group had met. And there was a double homicide at the Central Station Vertical Circulator Building on December 12th. First, our police department is the lead agency investigating those homicides. MTPD is working closely with law enforcement partners. They have identified a primary suspect and working with the sister agencies to help locate that suspect and working with the public. I believe something went out to the public announcing be on the lookout for kind of announcement. Second, in the coordination of St. Paul, we decided to temporarily close the Vertical Circulator Building on December 27th. I want to mention that temporarily closing a facility is really a difficult decision. We did it in concert with the city of St. Paul. We did it because we think there's some improvements that can be made to that facility and to the adjoining Skyway that might bring some additional safety features to the location. We think there can be better coordination between our police, St. Paul Police, and ambassadors that we have in the city of St. Paul. So we decided to temporarily close that facility. But what's not lost on us is the tension of closing a facility that's really intended for people who have mobility challenges and have a difficult time navigating the Skyway system and need an elevator to get up and down to the station. We have access available through Alliance Bank Building. We worked with St. Paul, and St. Paul worked with Alliance Bank Building owner to have that available, but again, this is a temporary issue. I think it reminds me of, we've had a lot of requests in the last months about changing facilities or removing bus shelters or removing benches, and there's always a tension between doing those sorts of changes as a security strategy and the tension of trying to serve the public that those facilities were intended for. And I want to give you perhaps not the confidence that we always make the right decision all the time at the right time, but that we're thinking about that tension as we have those requests put in front of us. Sometimes we have a committee that looks at facility changes, and they consider the use of those facilities. They consider the traffic and make recommendations. And sometimes we approve the request, and sometimes we don't approve the request. But we try to make the best decision within the balance of those concerns and interests. So with that, I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Questions, comments from council members? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a comment first and then a question. First, thank you and your entire staff for the extraordinary effort last week. I just want to say that myself. I mean, that we all know how challenging it must have been to get around in the snow and the ice and so forth, and Metro Mobility. Those statistics are really amazing that you were able to do what you were able to do. But to keep transit moving, because as we know and as we have seen recently, there are so many people who are so dependent and don't have the option, as you say, of being in our warm house saying thank you. So just want to echo your sentiments. My question for you is on the operator hiring. If you have an individual who has applied to be a light rail operator, and if you fill the quota and you have all the backup that you need, at least for now, can those individuals be encouraged to drive bus? And then would they be able to take priority when another light rail opportunity opened up hiring in the future?
Yeah, Madam Chair, and again, Councilmember Cummings, that's a great question. We've talked exactly about that scenario. If we end up with more light rail operators than we can hire to. We have lots of other jobs that we want to put in front of these individuals while they're waiting for a light rail opening to occur. As you will recall, the reason we were able to reach agreement with ATU about going out to the public instead of exclusively going to bus operators is because we weren't getting enough bus operators to apply for those positions. So hopefully, if we are in a situation where we have to turn back potential applicants, we can find that other place for them, and they can have another opportunity down the line to fill an opening in the future. So great question, thank you.
Additional questions, comments? Councilmember Sterner.
Right, thank you. And then my sentiments about the buses, I had a few people that I know that are transit dependent. They said, well, the buses are always running, so they were real appreciate seeing them and help them get to some appointments as well. And my question has to do with the security, with hiring police officers or having our police officer in training riding the trains or our ambassador program. What's the status of any of those things as far as our presence, especially on our light rails?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Sterner, our police officer numbers are not rising, they're holding steady at this point. There may be rising slightly. We just hired a new group, but you know, we're always offsetting it against attrition, but they're holding fairly steady. They're not rising, I'll say this, they're not rising as fast as what we would like them to do. But we are trying to focus the attention of the officers that we have on where we need the work the most, without neglecting other areas that require assistance, on-call assistance as well. So that leans toward light rail. The new officers that we've just brought on, we've assigned to light rail for now, but we're constantly balancing needs for having 500 buses out on the system and 90 rail cars out on the system. Most of what I hear about is light rail issues, so we're leaning light rail, but we have to be careful not to neglect the bus side of the business on this.
Thank you.
Great, any additional questions, comments? Councilmember Fredson.
Chair, I would just express appreciation for your rapid response to the double homicide downtown. I know Leslie was at the meeting, the chief, within hours, on the phone, working with the mayor and Councilmember Hiniker in both police departments to try to figure out a way to tackle the challenges we face. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, any closing thoughts? I'm just gonna say what some of my other council members have already said. So definitely to Metro Transit, MTS, contractor providers. I see some of our operations and maintenance leaders in the audience. Thank you so much for the work over the last couple of weeks. We do know it's been tough. Hopefully winter will cut us a little bit of a break going forward, but we do appreciate it. And so just if you can please make sure to kind of relay that amongst your organizations. We are lucky where we are inside in a warm house, and we know how tough it can be. So thank you all. With that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Sterner. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Chambliss. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. And we are adjourned.